I think you never got married.
I think that the reason I didn't get married was because I would have to compromise too much. I think I took my cue from my mother there.
The late autumn light poured into her Pacific Palisades home the morning after the news broke. Outside, the ocean shimmered like glass, perfectly still, as if the world itself had paused in disbelief. On the oak desk in her study, where she often wrote letters she never mailed, lay a stack of Polaroids, each one a frozen heartbeat. Friends, children, trees, even strangers she'd asked to pose in passing. Diane Keaton, the woman who had spent a lifetime teaching audiences how to fall in love with imperfection, was gone. She died on October 11th, 2025, at 79.
Hollywood icon Diane Keaton has died at the age of 79.
The shock rippled through Hollywood. But in her family's quiet grief, another realization began to take shape, one that both comforted and haunted them. Diane had left behind not just laughter, not just art, but a fortune so vast it would alter the shape of their lives. Reports estimated her estate at well over $120 million, an empire built from decades of films, real estate, photography, and royalties that still roll in every month. To most, that number symbolized victory, but to those who loved her, it represented something more complex. Because this isn't just money, it's a map of everything she gave up to earn it. Her wealth had always been entangled with sacrifice. The same precision that built her career had slowly taken pieces of her joy. If you've ever spent years striving to prove yourself, you know that paradox, the way achievement can feel like armor and prison at once. Diane understood that better than anyone. And that's where her story begins, not in glamour, but in fear. Diane Hall was born in Los Angeles in 1946, in a small, sun-baked house that smelled of turpentine and coffee. Her mother, Dorothy, was a creative spirit with a camera always nearby. Her father, John, a pragmatic real estate agent who counted pennies but dreamed of flying planes. The household was ordinary on the surface, yet tension hummed beneath it between expression and restraint, freedom and duty. As a child, Diane would sneak into her mother's studio, brushing her fingers over dried paint and thinking, "This is what freedom must feel like." But she also saw her mother's dreams fade into the background, replaced by housework and expectation. That quiet tragedy branded her heart. She decided even then that she would never surrender to smallness. She would live boldly, speak loudly, and never depend on anyone for permission. At Santa Ana High School, she was tall, awkward, curious. She sang in choir, performed in plays, and wore clothes that defied trends, oversized jackets, floppy hats, ties from thrift stores. Other girls copied fashion magazines. Diane copied no one. Yet behind her eccentric confidence was insecurity so deep it hummed like static. She once admitted that applause made her tremble, not from pride, but from disbelief that anyone would clap for her at all. She watched the world from a distance, fascinated and afraid. And deep down, she believed that visibility was safety. That, the more people looked at her, the less likely she'd disappear like her mother's abandoned art. It was a dangerous lesson, the seed of both her genius and her loneliness. When graduation came, she packed a single suitcase and a secondhand camera, kissed her parents goodbye, and boarded a bus for New York City. She didn't know it then, but the road ahead would turn that teenage wound into an empire. The city swallowed her whole. New York in the late 60s was chaos, painted in neon Vietnam protests, jazz bars, and smoke curling from subway grates. Diane enrolled at the neighborhood Playhouse School of Theater, studying under Sanford Meisner's disciples, learning to listen, react, and strip away pretense. She auditioned endlessly, rejected often. On her breaks, she sold used books and sang backup in cafes to keep her rent paid. There was a ferocity in her eyes, even then, a refusal to bend to what casting agents demanded. When they told her to straighten her hair, she refused. When they said she was too quirky, she smiled wider. Her first break came in 1968 when she joined the cast of the musical Hair. But even in a production famous for its daring nudity, Diane drew a line: she refused to appear nude on stage. It was a small act of rebellion that defined her forever. She would be daring, yes, but always on her own terms. Then fate intervened. Woody Allen, already making waves as a playwright and stand-up comic, saw something in her auditions others missed. He cast her in Play It Again, Sam, and the chemistry was instant. Diane's hesitant laughter, her quick wit, her emotional transparency. They weren't performance tricks. They were survival instincts. Alan gave her a platform, but she supplied the magic. From there, she learned something crucial: the art of being both authentic and armored. She once said in an interview, "Acting saved me because it let me hide inside honesty." That paradox would guide her career, and it would also haunt her personal life. When Francis Ford Coppola offered her the role of Kay Adams in The Godfather in 1972, she didn't realize it would change her life. Surrounded by giants Marlon Brando, Al Pacino, Robert Duvall, she felt like an imposter. But her quiet restraint became magnetic. Kay wasn't just Michael Corleone's wife. She was his mirror, reflecting the cost of power. The film exploded into legend, and suddenly Diane Keaton was everywhere. The same critics who once dismissed her as too strange now called her riveting. When The Godfather Part 2 arrived, she cemented her place in cinematic history. Yet fame didn't comfort her. It unnerved her. "I never thought success would feel so lonely," she once confessed. Then came Annie Hall, 1977, the role that would define her. The wardrobe, mostly her own clothes, became cultural shorthand for independence. Her hesitant laugh, her fumbling warmth, it all felt improvised because it was real. She won the Academy Award for Best Actress, and an entire generation fell in love with that radiant oddity named Diane Keaton. But with triumph came anxiety. The world had decided who she was. Hollywood demanded she stay frozen as Annie Hall, forever charming, forever whimsical. She couldn't breathe inside that costume. She began turning down scripts that copied the formula. Friends thought she was crazy to reject guaranteed hits, but she wasn't chasing fame anymore. She was fighting for freedom, and that's when everything changed. In the 1980s, when many actresses saw their roles shrink, Diane reinvented herself. She took on dramatic parts in Reds, Looking for Mr. Goodbar, Crimes of the Heart, proving she could carry heartbreak as effortlessly as humor. She directed, produced, and photographed. Now, if you're wondering how she managed to stay relevant in an industry built to discard women after 40, the answer is discipline disguised as eccentricity. Every quirk served purpose. The hats, the gloves, the layers, they weren't vanity. They were armor. They allowed her to shapeshift while staying hidden. Yet the reinvention had a cost. Her perfectionism hardened. She became both commander and captive of her own myth. The studio saw her as dependable but unpredictable, a paradox only she could sustain. Behind closed doors, she kept journals filled with self-doubt and sketches of empty rooms. She was working harder than ever to hold her empire together, yet feeling it slip from emotional reach. By the 1990s, the Diane Keaton brand was a global entity. Her career had spanned 5 decades, earning her tens of millions from box office hits like Father of the Bride, Something's Gotta Give, The First Wives Club, and countless endorsements. But her fortune didn't end with film. She poured her earnings into architecture and restoration, buying old homes, reviving them brick by brick, then selling them at staggering profit. Her real estate portfolio stretched from Beverly Hills to Palm Springs, from Manhattan lofts to a ranch outside Santa Barbara. Each property reflected a chapter of her psyche. The Beverly Hills estate, with its soaring white walls and library scent of cedar, symbolized her appetite for control. The desert home, stripped to stone and light, captured her longing for peace. She also invested in photography collections, design books, and vintage art, publishing bestsellers that chronicled her aesthetic philosophy. Royalties from those books, combined with residuals from film libraries, created a passive income machine estimated to exceed $5 million annually by the 2010s. But here lies the pivot: wealth became weight. The staff salaries, the maintenance, the taxes on 6 estates, the accountants managing trusts for her children, each demanded attention. Every success carried echoes of responsibility. She'd built an empire, yes, but empires require upkeep, and sometimes even their creators long to escape them. She once told a journalist, half joking, "I have more bathrooms than friends." It was funny until it wasn't. The laughter faded into truth. Away from the cameras, Diane lived a quieter, more uncertain life. She struggled with anxiety and perfectionism, obsessing over details most people wouldn't notice. Nights often ended in isolation, her favorite record playing softly, a half-finished script on the table, and her dog stretched across her lap. Friends describe her as generous yet elusive. She would show up to a dinner full of energy, crack jokes, tell stories, and then vanish for months. Fame for her was a form of protection. It kept people at a distance where they couldn't hurt her. The adoption of her children, Dexter in 1996 and Duke in 2001, shifted her axis. Motherhood terrified her. She confessed that love, once theoretical, suddenly became tangible and fragile. She balanced movie sets with PTA meetings, interviews with bedtime stories, but she was determined not to repeat her parents' mistakes.
I prefer to read things out loud. Like one of the ways that, because I am an actor, or am I an actress? What am I?
She wanted her kids to see her as both artist and mother, though she often worried she was failing at both. By her 60s, she found herself restless, creative, yet haunted. She filled sketchbooks with home designs, poems, and letters to people she no longer spoke to. She worried about aging, not for vanity, but for invisibility. "I worked my whole life to be seen," she once said, "and now I'm fading again." That ache never fully left her. Her romantic life fascinated tabloids, but the truth was simpler, lonelier. She had loved deeply Warren Beatty's brilliance, Al Pacino's intensity, Woody Allen's wit, but commitment frightened her. Marriage felt like a cage she couldn't decorate enough to feel safe in. Instead, she poured her affection into friendships, art, and later her children. Still, her independence cost her intimacy. There were friends who drifted away, collaborators who misunderstood her solitude as arrogance. There were rifts she never quite repaired. Yet through all of it, she carried grace, a grace that came from knowing imperfection was her language. Her children remained her compass. Dexter, now married, manages charitable projects in Los Angeles. Duke, an aspiring filmmaker, preserves her archives. They called her Mom, but they also called her Boss. She balanced tenderness with command, laughter with direction. And though she often feared dying alone, she died surrounded by family. That, more than any award, was her victory. Diane's will, according to reports, outlines trusts for her children, funds for the Los Angeles Conservancy, donations to film preservation projects, and endowments for women in film scholarships. Her estate also includes intellectual property rights to her memoirs, photographs, and restored architectural designs assets projected to continue generating income long after her death. But what will become of her archives? Her journals, stacked in linen boxes labeled by year, hold decades of self-reflection, heartbreak, and philosophy. Who decides what the world can read? Her children? Her publishers? Or the public that once adored her? Who inherits the burden of managing a legend? And more profoundly, how does one live freely under the shadow of a parent who turned eccentricity into empire? Wealth can provide, but it can also imprison. For Dexter and Duke, the real inheritance may be learning how to separate their mother's image from their own identities. Her fortune ensures they'll never struggle materially, but her story ensures they'll never live without comparison. By early 2025, Diane's health had begun to decline. Friends noticed she was thinner, slower, yet still fiercely witty. She was working on a photography book tentatively titled Light and Silence, chronicling her decades of interior shots. When asked if it would be her last, she smiled and said, "Maybe, but I've said that before." In late September, she was hospitalized briefly for complications related to a long-term illness she had kept private. She returned home in early October, surrounded by her children and a small circle of friends. On October 11, 2025, the woman who once filled every frame with restless energy slipped away peacefully in her sleep. That night, the Pacific wind rattled her windows. Across Los Angeles, candles flickered in film studios, theaters, and living rooms where her movies had once been comfort for strangers. Tributes poured in, directors calling her a national treasure, actors remembering her kindness, fans sharing stories of how Annie Hall or Baby Boom had changed their lives. In the days that followed, her children walked through her home, touching the photographs, the hats, the Polaroids, feeling both gratitude and grief. Every object whispered a memory. They realized her true legacy wasn't in the checks that would clear or the houses that would sell, it was in the details she left behind. Handwritten notes, art books marked with coffee stains, the laughter echoing faintly from old recordings. Diane Keaton's life mirrors a truth that transcends celebrity. It's about the fragile dance between visibility and vulnerability, between ambition and authenticity. She showed that eccentricity could be elegance, that humor could be defiance, and that aging could be a masterpiece instead of a decline. She turned her mother's unfulfilled dreams into her own fulfilled mission. She took the pain of invisibility and converted it into legacy. And she did it all while remaining, at heart, the same girl who once watched sunlight fall through her mother's studio window.
We're all older, everybody's a little looser. Everybody can kind of manage things a little better.
Her story reminds us that success doesn't erase insecurity, it coexists with it. It tells us that wealth without reflection becomes noise, but wealth anchored in meaning becomes art. Every house she built, every photograph she took, every role she played was, in truth, a note in one long love letter to imperfection itself. If you've ever felt unseen, if you've ever built walls just to survive, you already understand Diane Keaton's genius. She made that feeling universal and beautiful. So tonight, as the screen fades and the credits roll, let's thank her properly. Thank you, Diane, for teaching us that beauty lives in asymmetry, that laughter can be armor, that solitude can still be full of light.
Because look, I'm a person who's never married. And I think that Randy had the most significance.
You didn't just leave behind a fortune, you left behind a lesson in how to live honestly, awkwardly, wonderfully human. If her work ever carried you through heartbreak, if her voice ever made you smile when you needed it most, consider leaving a small tribute below. Even a single like is a whisper of gratitude, a way to say thank you for the light she gave us. And as long as her movies play, as long as her photographs hang on walls, Diane Keaton will not be gone. She'll live in every soft laugh that breaks tension, in every woman who dares to be strange, and in every quiet soul who finally realizes that being yourself is the most cinematic act of all.